let me give all of you an introduction about today's speaker. Words will fall short to introduce our eminent scholar and guest speaker of today's program. As such, a stalwart personality cannot be described with any combination of words, and this is a Herculean task which has been bestowed on me, and I can only try my best to introduce. He is a person with a zest and zeal of learning and always ranked high academically. His All India rank was 51 in the KVPY scholarship exam for budding scientist given by Government of India. He has also bagged the NTSC scholarship, which is given by the Government of India. He did his BTech with honors in mechanical engineering and minors in systems and control engineering from IIT Bombay. His BTech thesis was focused on mimicking Kochlear hydrodynamics in a physical model, and it was under the guidance of Professor Sripriya Ramamurthy. He later on moved to pursue his master's degree in mechanical engineering at School of Mechanical Engineering, Purdue University. His master's thesis was focused on nonlinear dynamics in spider webs, and the title of the thesis was Analysis of Nonlinear Vibrations in Spider Webs. This was done under the guidance of Professor James Gibbert. Presently, he is pursuing his PhD from same university, and his PhD research work is focused on cellular agriculture for meat and food printing. He is performing his doctoral research work on scaling up of cultivated meat manufacturing with edible scaffolds. He worked as a graduate teaching assistant for ME 375 system modeling analysis, and also as a researcher at Advanced Dynamics and Mechanics, that is ADAMS research group in Herrick's laboratory at Purdue University. He also has, to his credit, publications in referred journals in the area of cellular agriculture. At present, he is associated with Ajay Malshe, professor and also his PhD guide at School of Mechanical Engineering, Purdue University. Together, they are working at RISE Lab on cell-based meat, that is shortly called as CBM, and it is also called as cultured meat, in vitro meat, cultivated meat, and which is a promising solution to augment world's meat supply, that is 3D printing of the meat. Such a great scholar, great academician, and a researcher is none other than, as you can see on the screen, Mr. Vishwesh Koran. So welcome Vishwesh sir for today's FDP session, and thank you for accepting the invitation for delivering this keynote address. So the topic for today's keynote address is convergent manufacturing for 3D printing and food applications. So let me hand over this session to you, Vishwesh sir. You can continue.
Yes, thank you so much for your kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm also thankful to YCCE and the program conveners for giving me this opportunity to share my views on this trends, challenges, and future roadmap for transition of my research. I'll start sharing my screen. It's visible. Begin. Okay, so I think this was covered very well by Professor Mahatme, and I thank you once again for your kind words bestowed upon me so early in my career. To add to what he said, just a few fun facts about me: that I'm a former national level chess player, I'm a board games enthusiast, and I also play table tennis and badminton recreationally. And now let's dive into the topic. So this presentation is organized in such a manner that first I'll give you the motivation for my research, Followed by that, I'll give you some background, and then we'll talk about the technical challenges, following which we will highlight what's in hold for the future in this research, like what's the roadmap for transition, how convergent this research is, and what can we expect to come out of it in near and farther in the future. So to begin with the motivation. Yes, so in this slide, you can see the state of today's global protein supply. You can see 42% of today's protein supply comes from animal protein. And in that, majority of it includes poultry, pig, and beef. And we have 10% milk. So you can see for nutrition, majority of the people in the world still rely on animal proteins and meat. And now we come to the crossroads. We are at the crossroads of sustainable food security for growing world population. According to WEF report, by 2050, we will need to increase the food production by around 50 to 100%. That is almost double it, because our population is going from 7 billion people to 10 billion people. Moreover, this population is shifting towards more meat and dairy intensive diets. And here, at the crossroads of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 2 involves zero hunger, and Goal 13 and 15 involve climate action and life on land, respectively. Now we can see as the world population is growing, how these goals can be conflicting with each other. This image is from a BCG analysis, where they show what the conflict is while ensuring food supply and while ensuring climate action. And this scenario is not even very different for India. I mean, even though from my funding agencies and my research concerns, they are right now motivated from a global perspective, but the Indian scenario has many similarities. And here are some of the relevant facts regarding this Indian scenario. From 2017 to 2019, 40% of India's population was undernourished, according to the Global Health Index. Secondly, 70 to 80% of Indian population is non-vegetarian. And according to recent studies, to meet India's rising animal protein demand, pasture land is projected to double by 2030. This means that wherever there is greenery, wherever there are forests right now, that needs to be converted to cropland and pasture land, which is estimated to double. And that's a huge loss to the biodiversity of India. On the contrary, we see that Indian urban population is growing steadily, with today more than 30% of India's population living in cities. What this means is that there are lesser number of people who are working in the agriculture sector or in the livestock farming sector, as they are moving to cities in search of a more comfortable life. The recording got stopped. Is there an issue? Should I continue?
No, you can continue.
All right. And lastly, we see that the Indian meat industry is highly organized. Because it is unorganized, it makes regulation harder. So without surveillance, there is prevalence of unhygienic conditions in slaughterhouses. And also, for storage, the cold chain infrastructure is not that great. That means that there is a high risk of meat spoiling and meat-borne diseases spreading as we increase the production of meat. And this is why, from the Indian scenario and from the global scenario, we need nothing short of an agricultural revolution. Today, we are in the midst of the fourth agricultural revolution. The first revolution was in 10,000 BC when we started farming, when we went from hunters gatherers to farmers. Then in 1900s, we started scientifically investigating our farming practices, where we had practiced like crop rotation, we investigated which crops grew better in which climate, and so on. After World War I, we saw mechanization, where machines were used for farming activities like tilling and so on. Around 1970s, with the advent of genetic modifying technology, we saw the Green Revolution. With the Green Revolution, we were able to increase our yield drastically, and that helped us sustain till now. But as we have seen, even after the third revolution, we are now at a stage where we need to further improve our supply. And this is where the fourth revolution kicks in. The fourth revolution is a digital revolution. And as can be seen by the title here, it rightly points out in the direction that technology is the factor which is going to fix our future food crisis. On the image on the right, you can see the key drivers for the fourth agricultural revolution. And the field of my research in that highlighted is alternative proteins. So before we move on, I want to clarify. When I say alternative proteins, I mean specifically meat which has been grown from cells. In this world, you might have heard about plant-based proteins, but in the Indian context, I find them a bit odd because they try to mimic meat's texture and flavor from plant-based protein mixtures. And in India, we have a large variety of vegetarian options, which even non-vegetarians love to try, and they are made from like plant-based proteins. So trying to mimic meat from plant-based proteins in Indian context makes a little less sense. And that is why whenever I say alternative proteins right now, I'll always refer to animal proteins. To give you a background of cellular agriculture, what is cellular agriculture and how does it produce the alternative proteins I'm talking about? Basically, you grow meat from cells up. So in manufacturing, you have two approaches for a product. You have a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. Till now, in livestock farming, we have been using a top-down approach where we first rear the animal, let it grow, let it gain weight for around 3 years, and then we slaughter it. When we slaughter it, we remove the unwanted parts and consume the desired parts, which then become meat. This is a subtractive approach, and that is why, because you go from animal to meat, it is top down. The beauty of this approach of cellular agriculture is that it is bottom up. You collect stem cells from an animal, which are then put in a bioreactor for proliferation. Proliferation means we increase their number and their density sufficiently so that we can put them in the next stage. In the next stage, we seed the cells in scaffolds. What these scaffolds are, I'll explain later in the presentation. And after seeding them on scaffolds, you let them grow, you let them mature, and in the end, you harvest the product, which is your cultured meat or cultivated meat product. On Gartner's hype curve, you can see the cellular agriculture is at the peak. To talk a bit more about the curve, this curve divides the stage of technology into 5 parts. First is the discovery phase, where we see that the technology will be incoming in the future. Second is the peak of expectations, where everybody is excited, everybody is investing in it, everybody is researching on it, but it has not yet reached commercialization. Indeed, reaching commercialization is difficult because going to the last mile and doing those changes so that your product suits the market is very laborious and it's very tough. And that is when the technology falls into the trough of disillusionment. After which you have enlightenment, meaning you have now figured out most of the issues. The product is now in the market and is ready to roll. And lastly, when the product gains traction, there is much more research into product development, the productivity increases, and then it causes a disruption. Some of the familiar things which you might have seen here are precision farming or plant-based alternatives. Focusing on precision farming, it talks more on vertical farming, hydroponic farming, and such technologies. But coming back to cellular agriculture, right now, we are at the peak of excitement. There is a lot of research going on in this. There are a lot of companies who have raised around $1 billion or $2 billion, and they are actively researching this technology to make a viable customer product. Before we move on, I'd like to define the cell-based meat analog or CBM. This is also referred to as cultured meat, cultivated meat, or in vitro meat in the literature. From now onwards, we'll refer to it as CBM. As stated before, CBM is meat that is produced by culturing cells. This approach makes the most sense because you see, animals, when they grow for 3 years, they need to maintain homeostasis. That is, they need energy to carry on their biological functions. Nature has made animals such that they can live and they can survive, not so that we can eat them. And that is why, from an energy perspective, when we let them grow and then kill and then slaughter them, we waste a lot of energy. That is why making them from cells makes sense. The second point about CBM is that it should have the same organoleptic properties as conventional meat before and after cooking. Organoleptic properties refer to the properties which affect the taste, flavor, and mouthfeel of any food which you have. And essentially, we say that CBM at this stage should be same as conventional meat. It should be biologically equivalent to traditional meat. In this sense, when an animal is slaughtered, the cells undergo changes. After death, their oxygen supply is cut off to the cells. That induces some chemical transitions in the cells from the body, and that essentially softens the meat after the animal is slaughtered. When you're culturing cells, this is not going to happen. So in the final stage, when you harvest cultured meat, you need to make sure you add some post-processing so that the meat is biologically equivalent. At this stage, it is also important to differentiate between comminuted and textured meat. Comminuted meat refers to ground meat, which is like sausage or which does not have a fixed texture or physical structure. Whereas textured meat is like a ribeye or a chicken breast, which has a defined physical structure, meaning you have spatial locations for fats and muscles, which are almost common for all the breasts. And that is how you differentiate between them. You need to understand that it is difficult to produce textured meat because the structure needs to be closer to that of the animal from which we have taken the cells. This study from Good Food Institute shows why CBM is a sustainable alternative. As compared to conventional meat, you see we have less global warming potential and way less land use. That is because when you farm livestock and when you rear animals, they emit methane, which is a greenhouse gas, which is a highly effective greenhouse gas. Secondly, the livestock involves pasture land, which we talked about in the Indian scenario. But when you grow cultivated meat, this is going to grow in a bioreactor, like in a factory. And that ensures you can stack them vertically and you can drastically reduce the amount of land required to produce the same meat. At the same time, you need to rear the animals for 3 years before you slaughter them. But for cultivated meat, you can culture the cells within 3 to 4 months to get an equivalent amount of meat as from an animal. Moving on. This right now is the commercial landscape. We talked about how everyone is excited. We have seen there are various startups which are focusing on culturing meat, which are focused on culturing meat protein, which are focused on culturing meat fats, or different parts of meat, which are focused on growing two types of different cells together. Even in India, we have clear meat, but as we can see, the Indian scene is slightly behind, and the leaders in this, which I'd like to highlight, are Moza Meat and Meatable from Netherlands. Then you have Sheop Meats in Singapore, and you have Aleph Farms in Israel. Now we will dive into the technical challenges of cellular agriculture. These challenges, as we are transitioning from what the motivation was to what now are the technical problems which we need to overcome. This will highlight all the engineering research and the interdisciplinary aspects for cellular agriculture and for CBM. The technical challenges are mostly centered around the scale up and cost reduction of CBM to have price parity with conventional meat. In that aspect, we have challenges referring to cell lines, referring to the culture media, referring to scaffolds, and referring to bioreactor design. To recapitulate, what happens in cellular agriculture? You have stem cells biopsied from an animal. They are proliferated, which means they grow in number. For this growth and for proliferation, for culturing them, we need the culture media, which supplies the cells with nutrition and with compounds, which make the cells feel like they are inside the body still, and they can still function that way. After proliferation, we seed the cells onto scaffolds. On the scaffolds, cells attach, they grow, and then they differentiate and they become mature. As we talked about previously, we have mature cells in the animals, which then die and give texture to the meat. And the last challenge is about the bioreactor design. All the process I described before, it happens in a controlled environment in a bioreactor, because when we culture cells, we need to optimize the conditions for its growth. In this, I'll be focusing more on scaffolds and bioreactor design, as those are closer to my research. And here we need to understand why we need scaffolds or why we need to seed cells. There is a slight difference between fermentation brewing like in a beer and culturing mammalian cells or meat cells. Meat cells are adherent, meaning they need to attach to a surface to grow. In our body, that surface is given by the extracellular matrix, which we have. Yeast, on the other hand, can be suspended in the nutrient medium. They can soak in the nutrients and still live. And that is why we will need scaffolds for growing CBM. For the scaffolds, the required properties or the required challenges are we need to cross the hurdle of mass hierarchical manufacturing. We need to introduce multi-material manufacturing for edibility, mechanical properties, and cues. Lastly, we also need to functionalize the surface of the scaffold so that the cells attach to them and grow. In the bioreactor, we need to overcome the challenges of scaling up and scaling out, of system design, and of sensing and control. I'll go over these challenges in detail in the next few slides. First, let's talk about mass hierarchical manufacturing. By hierarchical manufacturing, what I mean is that scaffolds have different geometrical properties at different length scales. You will have some geometrical features visible at the submicron scale, which is less than a micron. Then you'll have some features in the micron scale, which is around 10 to 100 microns. And then you'll have some features which will be in the millimeter scale. Now, why is that so? On the left, you can see what is the structure of muscle in meat. In that, you can see even this meat structure is hierarchical. That is, you have muscle fibers, which are composed of smaller fibers, which are ultimately composed of fibrils. And you can, again, dissect the structure down to cells. Because we want to mimic the taste, we need to have a similar structure. And that can only be achieved by hierarchical manufacturing. The other important properties which are required for matching the organoleptic properties of conventional meat are anisotropy. The scaffold should form a network. And then when we the properties on the left, they pertain to cell attachment and cell growth, where hierarchy, anisotropy, and network allow the cells to attach, to form tubes like these, and then finally to form a meat-like structure. On the right, when we have stiffness, strength, and toughness, these properties not only play a role in cell culture, but they also play a role in the mouthfeel of the ultimate product. Meaning, when you will eat a cell-based meat product, the stiffness, strength, and toughness is going to affect how hard or how chewy you feel the meat is. This slide summarizes the design requirements for the scaffold, for which we need to have the manufacturing processes that are discussed in the next slide. For scaffolds, we need to have multi-material manufacturing. In this, the most important message is that we need to think of food and cells as materials. This may sound a bit odd from the beginning because cells are living organisms and food is something we consume, but still we need to identify their properties just like we do of metals or polymers. And research is active in scaffold fabrication techniques, which is suitable for edible materials and cell-laden materials. So you see, this field has been developing from biomedical. So they have fabrication techniques in which you can grow organs, but most of those materials are not edible. and you cannot always have cells attached to them. That is why for growing meat, you need to have these two important characteristics. I'll go over the materials and the methods in more detail. When we talk about scaffolding materials, we have edible materials like gelatin, we have collagen, we have plant proteins, we have decellularized plant, and we have polysaccharides like sugar and HLA. To process these, to acquire the 6 properties of anisotropy, network, and hierarchy, we use one or a combination of these methods in which stereolithography, solvent-based extrusion free forming, bioprinting, and fused deposition modeling are at the convergence of food printing, or the conversion which involve the conversion manufacturing for food printing. Other than that, we also have solvent casting, in which you have a sacrificial material which, when removed from pores, in which cells can go and grow. Similarly, you have gas foaming. You have freeze drying, in which water from a construct is dried, that is, it is evaporated out at sub-zero temperatures so that the integrity of material is not compromised. And then you have selective laser sintering and thermal induced phase separation. These methods can be used to form a scaffold, which can be either a hydrogel or a solid scaffold. Lastly, we also need processing to functionalize the cell surface. Cell surface functionalization is necessary because even in our bodies, which is in vivo, the ECM, which is the extracellular matrix on which cells attach, its interaction with cells plays an important role in cell growth and even in cell direction. Imagine when you get injured or when some of your cells die, this ECM can give signals or cues to the cells to change its state of growth. It can direct the stem cells towards the site where the cell has died and let it proliferate there. Because we are trying to culture cells, manufacture scaffold surfaces also need to be post-processed, or they need to be coated with such functional ingredients from the beginning so that the cells can attach, proliferate, and mature on the scaffolds to ultimately yield our CBN. Next, we talk about bioreactors and the challenge of scaling up and scaling out. This challenge is important from fluid transport perspective, where we need to design bioreactors which do not have nutrient gradients along the scale, whether it be lab scale, which is like around 500 ml, of the photo of which you can see where my cursor is, or they can be pilot or industrial scale, which can have the capacity of 100 liter or 10,000 liter. In this, we have the stirred tank bioreactors, the wave reactor, or the hollow fiber reactor, in which the medium flows through the hollow pipes and cells are on the boundary of those pipes, separated by a perfusible surface. This is similar to what happens in our body. Think of it like blood, where the fluid flowing in the hollow fibers is blood, which transports nutrients and waste in and out, and cells on the perfusing walls interact with the fluid and grow. An important note here, you may think that we have such bioreactors or large-scale bioreactors for beer or for other distillery alcohol spirits, or even for making medicine in which cells produce some compounds like insulin or some artificial proteins. But a major difference in that, apart from adherence, is that they also can tolerate a higher shear rate. In the stirred tank bioreactor, this example can be very clear. You see, you have an impeller to drive media, meaning when the impeller rotates, it can mix the media very well and ensure there are no nutrient gradients. But if that shear rate is too high, the cells die because of that high shear rate because they can't tolerate it. And that limits the speed of the impeller, which in turn limits how much you can diffuse the nutrients uniformly throughout the media in the bioreactor. So that is an important challenge for fluid dynamics engineers alike. Next technical challenge is on sensing. As we discussed before, culturing cells at a large scale requires optimum pH, osmolarity. Osmolarity refers to the salt concentration in the culture media, and waste removal along with maintaining the nutrient level of the cells in the medium. In this, we will need inline, least invasive, and economical sensing tools. And the research area I wanted to highlight you towards is that of edible electronics. Edible electronics is an upcoming field and it can have huge implications for CBM because all the materials in hand are edible. See, whenever a material is not edible, if it is subjected to proximity with a food product, it needs to be highly regulated so that we can be sure that it is not mixing or the level of that product is not as high so that when food is consumed by any person, it can cause him any harm. Lastly, in terms of challenges, we'll also talk about the product quality. In this scenario, advancement in food science research is important for optimizing the organoleptic properties of CBM. For conventional meat, we have methods like texture profile analysis and Warner-Brasler shear test that can be correlated with the desired texture and mouthfeel of conventional meat. But for CBM, these methods may need to be modified or we may need to find new methods as in the case of plant-based proteins. Because the compounds are different, different properties can vary differently and can correlate differently to the mouthfeel and texture, and that is why we may need new methods. Secondly, there are huge opportunities for data, AI, and ML research in developing online quality assessment tools like electronic nose and electronic tongue. To elaborate, how flavor comes as a mixture of compounds is not very clearly understood by researchers even today. If we have a better understanding of the compounds or of the ingredients which cause certain types of flavors, we can then optimize their concentration in the final CBM product, which can then enhance its taste and flavor. Now let's talk about the roadmap for transition into this technology. Having discussed the technical challenges, one thinks, okay, we have these challenges, but once we solve them, now what? Like, how will this product reach to the masses? How will this cause the disruption it promises to? For that, first, we need policy interventions from the government and clarity in framework, which are both important for market growth. The government should be proactive in passing laws and legislations that regulate labeling and inspection of manufacturing practices and products. This is important concerning how traditional meat farmers look at this product as something that is going to take away their livelihood. There are this issue in US has been so politicized that some states also have passed bills that do not allow to do not allow the label of meat on products which have not been obtained from slaughtering animals. To avoid this scenario in India, integration of communities and people who are at the risk of losing jobs is important so that the issue is not politicized, the science can progress, and there can be widespread adoption of this technology. The second aspect is of awareness and acceptance. I have been saying in the presentation that yes, the CBM needs to be closer to the meat. Why is that so? Because from research, we know that humans have food neophobia. If something is new, if you don't fully understand where that comes from, however a good of a foodie may be, will you will not want to try it multiple times or make it a part of your regular diet. Because we have grown this CBM in lab, this gives a tag of some unnatural processes which are happening. You see, we don't have animals, we have highly sophisticated equipments, and they are making some food which you're going to eat. So such neophobia and perceived unnaturalness are major hurdles in public adoption of this technology. To avoid this, research in technology communication models is very important. If we have to avoid a fate similar to GM technology. We know that when GM was conceived in 1970s and 1980s, there was a huge campaign of misinformation against this technology by its opposers. And it was so effective that today in Europe, most of the GM products are banned. Cell-based meat should not face such fate, and that's why we need to have good communication models. Lastly, when we talk about smooth transition and we talk about growth, we talk about the workforce. The workforce who is able to work for it and who has the required skill set. That will require vocational training of workers and also modification of curriculum in schools and colleges so that this transition is smooth and people can then actually have the skill set to work in the open jobs. This brings me to the conclusion of my talk. Talking about convergent manufacturing, we see how CBM manufacturing, which can be done by food printing, which can have cell culture, how highly convergent it is. It is because this issue surrounds food, right? Food is something which is a cultural thing. Because we need technology to intervene in this, we need to have convergence of engineering and social sciences, along with which we need to have convergence of food so that you can have good labels and ensure safety. And we need to have convergence of biomedical industry so that the raw materials which are developed are of good quality. Lastly, for projected benefits, I'd like to let you think a scenario. In the near term, we are going to have slaughter-free meat. We are going to have cruelty-free meat. We are going to have eco-friendly meat. To give you a bit more context on this, in 2013, Dr. Mark Post from Netherlands unveiled the first in vitro burger. That burger costed $325,000. Research now has brought this cost down to around $12 to $20. But still, this is 3 to 4 times more than that of conventional meat. And crossing this last leg is all the more difficult. But once we do that, once this product is widely adopted, you can also have customized meat with superior nutrition. With the combination of technologies like food printing, cell culture, bioprinting, or scaffold formation, like we discussed before, you can customize your meat based on your taste and your nutritional requirements. We can have better fats, we can have more vitamins or more trace minerals in the meat. We also can have craft meats and novel meats, meaning meats of animals which have gone extinct, or meats which are a combination of chicken and pork grown together. And that can lead to a variety of organoleptic properties, which will be novel. And lastly, in the far future, imagine that you have at-home meat grown in a household bioreactor. That is the ultimate goal of this technology. And that brings me to the end of my talk. I still have a few minutes left. And this is where I'd like to incite a discussion regarding the research. Over the last few days, we have heard from various accomplished individuals in their field. There is a lot of research going on, and yet we see that there is growing inequality in this world. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. The technology on which you're researching, which is convergent, highly interdisciplinary, very effective, very costly, that's all good. But the question comes, how is it helping the society? We need to understand that the funding of this technology, it always comes from society, right? They are the taxpayer dollars, whether they come from companies whose products ultimately consumers buy, or they come from government funding agencies. Because the resources come from society, if the research is not targeted towards it, like much of the technological research which may happen in Facebook or Instagram, which made technology such that it is more addictive, or even for like developing a Tesla or having a spacecraft going to Mars. Such technology is not helpful in the current scenario for social problems faced by the general populace, and that leads to inequality. That is one of the reasons I chose this topic, because having cellular agriculture, having food printing, having research based on food, it gives me a direct, tangible impact on the population research. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Okay, participants, you can ask the questions now.
Yes, you can put them in the chat box, or you can ask them to me directly.
Will someone type in their questions? I have a question for you, Vishwesh. I saw a slide regarding microfibrils, or we can say muscle generation inside the meat. Okay, so how it was done exactly that microfibrils were generated inside the meat?
Yes. So let me get into more specifics of this structure. On the left, we have imaged the meat at different geometrical at different length scales,
Yeah.
meaning Yeah, just give me a minute. I'll complete it. Yeah. So we have imaged at different length scales. That is how we got to know that, yes, even for this muscle, we have muscle fibers and we have endometrium and perimetrium. And we have like this organization of muscle fibers at different length scales, which ultimately forms myofibrils, which are made up of cells. That we know from imaging at different length scales. Now, how this translates to, say, CBM is by having the structural features of hierarchy. When we have hierarchy in length scale, just like in the left, you can see, right? You have larger muscle fibers, then one of which is expanded. In that, you have smaller muscle fibrils. Again, it is expanded. In that, you have myofibrils, and these are made up of cells. Having a similar length scale where you have length scale features which are in the micron level or in the cell level, which are submicron level, having such consecutive geometrical features will allow CBM to have such structure as meat. So that is how you'll get structures similar to myofibrils, similar to muscle fiber, and similar to the entire meat cell. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you. पेशेट्टीवर सर गिरी सरांचा माईक ओपन करता तू त्यांना प्रश्न विचारायचा.
Yes, so I see the question here is what is the scope of additive manufacturing in this domain?
Mr. Abhishek, this is Jayan Giri. The same question which I have typed over there. So as you talked about the printing process somewhere during your talk. So what is the trend going on in this domain? Whether the additive manufacturing or 3D printing somewhere is available in this particular domain?
To briefly answer the question, yes. And to elaborate on it, right now for scaffold fabrication, because we are at a stage where we have shown that it is technologically feasible, but nobody knows how to do it at scale. So at scale scaffold fabrication is still an open challenge in which the research is active. When people are not sure that what thing will work best, they are trying all the things to see which desirable properties we get out of that. And that is where you have techniques like stereolithography, solvent-based extrusion, or bioprinting. But in bioprinting, you have inks which have cells in them. So which are like cell-laden materials. So
what is the trend? What is the trend in the entire world related to this? Is it matured enough, or there are, a lot of scope in this particular area is there related to 3D printing? Even if you talk about the bioprinting.
And there is a lot of scope. There is a lot of scope.
Okay. Is there any commercial organization or any company directly involved in this type of products?
Oh, yes. Let me go back to the commercial landscape slide. Many of these companies, including, you can see the news from Aleph Farms. They have used 3D printing for targeted deposition of cells to form a structured meat. Previously, I talked about how chicken breast has a definite structure where different types of cells are arranged at different locations in the breast meat. So they have deposited cells at specific locations using this printing technique, and that is how they were able to make a structured meat from cell culture. And this is just one example. For additive manufacturing of food, if I am to talk about directly of consumable food, that's an entirely different scenario. And even in that, we have companies which are highly active, like Foodini, or I think that is the one that comes to my mind immediately.
Okay.
So those are making food.
Actually, my next question that whether it is really eatable or not. Whether it is only for the research or the companies are going to create something through 3D printing or additive manufacturing which will be eatable in nearest future for the normal public.
Yes, that is a very good question. You might have heard about the news in Singapore about Just Meats. Just Meats is selling cultured chicken nuggets in Singapore. They have a pilot plant. They have an ongoing production line. But because they are chicken nuggets, they are not structured meat. So they are just like ground meat or sausages. But they are able to grow them at a scale at which they can sell it commercially. Similarly, in USA, you have Upside Foods, which has recently opened its pilot plant, which is up for uh, public visitation. And this is entirely the point of this talk, where if you have awareness about this thing, you will be more comfortable trying it. You will understand that it is food because it is grown from the same cells which were in the meat. And that is why it is going to be similar and not something which is going to be unnatural or very different from what you currently consume.
Okay, so still the challenge of acceptability will be there in the world. Even if researchers usually work on this, still the challenge on the cost acceptability will be again the challenge for the researchers, right?
Yes, definitely. Because it comes to food, as I mentioned before, it's not just a technological issue, it's also a social issue, a cultural issue. And that is where acceptance takes time. Tackling food neophobia takes time. And that is why acceptance of this will take time. But research in that area is also very active.
There is also one another question by Amoli ma'am in the chat box.
Yes, I see. The question is that are there any health hazards analysis which is being carried? Yes. Wherever this meat is sold commercially, which is right now just in Singapore, they have formed a framework from government side. Just like in India, we have FSSAI, which analyzes the food for any hazards or for any associated risks. Similarly, Singapore's regulatory agency has carried out this hazard analysis, and that is after this analysis proved to be okay, that is when they went ahead and allowed these products to go in the market. To elaborate on that, each country is going to have its own procedure. USA is going to have its own, European Union is going to have its own, India is going to have its own. But where the meat is commercially sold, there have been analysis carried out. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So is there any questions again from anyone? Okay. So, Shweta sir, can you remove your PPT, your presentation?
Yes,
Please,
I will do
please
that.
stop. Yeah, please stop sharing your screen. So thank you, Vishwesh sir, for delivering such a knowledgeable session and enlightening us with the new research area like the food printing, cell-based uh, manufacturing of meat. And thank you for accepting our invitation and delivering this session despite your busy schedule. And on behalf of Aerocell YCC, we would like to present you with a virtual memento. Okay, please accept this virtual memento from our side. And that's all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I also enjoyed interacting with you guys and answering your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So just a minute, Vishwesh sir. Can we take a screenshot of this meet with the participants? All the participants, I ask all the participants to please open their camera so that we can take a screenshot. Okay. Is it okay, Peshettiwar sir?
Yes.
Is it done, sir? Peshettiwar sir? Okay. So thank you all for joining to this session. We will meet tomorrow in the first session. Thank you. You can do the meeting now. Thank you, Vishwas sir, again.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.